Okay, so this talk will be about PSScriptAnalyzer, just known as PSSA as an abbreviation. What I'll be covering in this talk is the VS Code integration into it. PSScriptAnalyzer is a module on the PS Gallery, but getting the interactive usage within an editor, and there is support in multiple editors. I'm just using VS Code as an example. Is very useful. I will show some of the new features, for example, compatibility analysis. So just to get an idea, like how many people here have to write scripts that have to also run on PowerShell version 3 and 4. Quite a few of them. Some of you have to write scripts that work cross-platform, so Windows and Linux. Well, seems to be the right session for you guys, because I'll be showing you basically rules that tell you if certain commandlets or types are available on certain platforms or PS editions with those new rule sets. The session will be mainly interactive, based off this GitHub repository, and part of my presentation is showing you how to set up things so they work out of the box. So you can just clone it, open the VS Code in the folders, how I do, and it should just work on your machines as well. All you need is VS Code and the PowerShell extension. So a bit about me. My name is Christoph Bergmeister. I'm a developer that has transitioned to be more on the DevOps side of things, working at Willis Towers Watson, which is a company that has specialized in the insurance industry, consulting and helping them better automate certain processes. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the cloud and data center category, and a maintainer of the tool that I'm presenting on. Also collaborating on various other repositories on the PowerShell side of things, the VS Code extension, the editor services, PowerShell itself, package management. You can find more information about me on GitHub or follow me on Twitter. I've got a blog that I sometimes update a bit. So, showing you, first of all, what is PSScriptAnalyzer? I think the majority of you knows what it is, or just quick hands up, who knows what a script analyzer is or has used it before? Okay, that's great. So then I don't need to go that much into detail. So most people will know the linting capability, so code analysis and style. What most people don't know, it's also hosting the formatting engine, where you can have desired format styles. It's published on PS Gallery. We have quite a lot of downloads in total and on a daily basis as well. Integration is into various editors like Visual Studio, VS Code, IntelliJ or Vim plugins. So the editors really see this module very useful for showing script analysis warnings or using it for formatting within the editor. Currently the support is for version 3 to 6. Going forward, we might restrict it to 5 or 6 to speed up development. It's MIT licensed, so you can build it yourself, redistribute it, same as PowerShell itself. So very open and open source. So let's jump right into the demo. So I'm looking into the first folder, default experience. And I'll be showing you that personally, I am not very satisfied with the default experience and how to enhance the default experience. So as a quick starter, some of you might have seen the squigglies that you get around aliases. You can do Control dot or click on the light bulb, replace it with a suggested correction. It fixes it for you. Something that I've added in the past is, say if a couple of those violations and you want to fix them all in one go, the commandlet is invoke script analyzer, and there is a fix switch on it. So on rules that return information about what the suggested correction would be, we can auto-fix them. Not all of them, but some of them. And this fix switch can be very useful if you inherit a code base and want to tidy it up so you end up with a clean slate of having 0 warnings. You can also suppress some of your warnings with this attribute. So at the moment we are suppressing them, so if I were to comment this out, you would expect to see squigglies because we have a rule about using right host, because on version 3 and 4 it is discouraged, but it's not being highlighted. So I'm hitting the command palette, Control-Shift-P in VS Code, just typing PSScriptAnalyzer, and there is a select PSScriptAnalyzer rules option, and what we see in there, not all rules are turned on by default. When you use the commandlet, it runs all the code analysis rules. So this is not very good, or I would like to run all rules by default, and I will show you how to do that. First going through a couple of other features, so the formatting that I mentioned. So if I have a selection, hit Control-KF, it does the formatting for me. There is some defaults in there, you can change them. So if I go to my settings, and I prefer to use JSON for editing it, but you can use whatever you're more comfortable with. There is a GUI version of it as well. There are settings for all sorts of code formatting rules, which is mostly about braces, new lines, whitespace, and all of that. If you don't want to go into detail of configuring all of those, use the preset option, which gives you 4 built-in rule sets that would cater for most cases. To give you an idea how they look like in practice, there is a nice GitHub issue detailing examples how it looks like, and then you can use those to define your preferred code style. What I suggest to you, if you store your source code, for example, in a Git repository, and someone else clones it, and then they might make a PR, you don't want them to make a PR in a code style that you don't prefer, and you don't want to tell them at the stage of making the PR. So what I suggest, when you set settings, you can set them at a workspace level, which means you check in the settings.json file. So the settings that I was editing here in my user profile, move them to the workspace, check them in. When they open VS Code in that folder, those settings will override your user settings. So that means they open your repository, they do the editing, and the editor will make sure when they write their code, it matches the style that you want users to use. So you don't end up with discussions at the pull request stage about, oh, I prefer this or that style. Moving on, I'm going to show some relatively new roles that I've added myself, as I've made some mistakes in the past. So I'm a C# developer, and when switching between PowerShell and C#, I make sometimes very silly mistakes, but they're just human mistakes. I'm just thinking this is the greater operator. And just by looking at it, you think, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. But then you check it in, you run it, and then later on you have to debug it line by line to find out where you made this silly mistake. And this happened not just to me, also to colleagues of mine. And we spent hours until we could find that line that was causing us this issue. A trivial mistake, but we want to avoid this mistake very early on. So I've written this rule to warn about the usage of it, and in a very similar case for the equal operator as well. But this rule is not turned on by default because it could yield false positives. In general, any code style or linting tool will have false positives. So a lot of people complain about those false positives, but it's the nature of those tools. If you want good analysis, you still need a user judgment and make a call to say, this is valid or this is okay. So take warnings in general with a pinch of salt. It's always up to user judgment to say this is right or wrong, and that's why you can suppress warnings. I've got some code here that has vulnerability in terms of code injection. I will show later that we can extend ScriptAnalyzer with external rules that would warn us about script injection vulnerabilities like we see them here. A rule that gets discussed a lot is the use declared variables more than assignments. It yields a lot of false positives. The message to you is the rule is limited to a script block basis in terms of the analysis that it can do. So quite often in pester tests, there's lots of script blocks, and then the analysis gives you a false positive where it says you're not using the variable, but actually you are. It's something just to bear in mind. The rule still has some usefulness in it, but it could be enhanced. It's just very difficult to implement that.
You seem to have fixed that problem for process blocks in a for each object command.
I have done some optimizations, but in general, the rule needs a rewrite.
Okay, because it still doesn't work for begin blocks. If I ever have a begin block that initializes a variable, I can guarantee that I need to then say, stop warning me about that condition.
Yeah, this is a known issue, and it's very much, the tool is open source. If you want to improve it, go ahead. It's the same way how I do it. I mean, I don't work for Microsoft, but I want to improve my efficiency, and the rules that I demoed have really saved me a couple of hours. Development on a tool is actually not that expensive. You need a bit of exposure to C# and .NET, but doing small features could be less than an hour of work in terms of development, testing, PR. Development is very lightweight. There's not a lot of process around it. So this is what I suggest is we are a community. Everyone tries to help out a bit. If everyone improves the tool a bit, it will slowly get better and better. So I just wanted to mention this rule as a lot of people complain about this, and it's just, yes, I see all these issues being raised, but this is not a trivial issue to resolve. Showing some more of the new features in 1.18 that has been recently released. So if I were to write code like this, it will give me a warning, and now it can actually fix the warning automatically. So I want to give you some reasoning about why we say the null operator should be on the left-hand side. There can be scenarios where the operator doesn't return anything. It's an implementation detail of the comparison operator. It was designed to be intelligent, but sometimes it's just not very intuitive to users. So if I have a statement like this here, it's returning me false. If I were to just negate it, I would expect it to return me true, which in this case, it doesn't. And the simple reason for that is because the operator is not returning anything, so the if statement is just falling through. So by having null on the left-hand side, you're guaranteed to have an object returned. So for this kind of comparison, it makes sense to have null on the left-hand side. About formatting, so some of the new features that I've added include pipeline indentation style. Currently, the default in the VS Code extension is to have no indentation, which is the old behavior, because currently we are aware of some edge cases that we want to fix in a patch update. You can still use it, but that's why configuration comes into play, and I will later talk about the difficulty of releasing a tool to such a big audience that there's always some edge cases that have to be fixed and after the release. So I've turned here the setting on, and then it nicely indents me the pipelines. There's also settings to have it indent only once, so it would look a bit like this. Then there's new formatting rules to allow you to have whitespace inside curly braces. Nice. It's just small little things where that doesn't really improve code quality, but it improves readability and consistency, and similar for pipes. I've added a setting in VS Code that wraps the usage in PSScriptAnalyzer to have white space around pipes. There's also one that has been requested for a while, which was correcting the casing. When you write code and you don't use tab completion, you might not have cased them correctly. And this setting as well is not turned on by default. So if we go here and look PowerShell.code formatting, but use correct casing. Let's turn it on. Nope. Yeah, there we are. So you can correct the casing, which is very nice when at the end of the day you're done and you read your scripts. They're nice and consistent. So the reason why this setting is turned off by default as well, there is some gotchas that we found later on, because the way the feature works under the hood is we're calling it to get command, and there can be a bit of an edge case. So when you do get command question mark, PowerShell interprets the question mark as a wildcard operator, returning you all commands that have just one character, and then it ends up correcting you question mark with for each object. So we fixed that in the current development branch, but those are things like super hard to predict. Like only once you go to production you find those subtle details. So that's why it is there already. You can use it. Whenever you make changes, this is software that you're running. Don't trust any software. So use source control, apply the formatting, look at the diff. Mostly we're quite stable. Those special cases are quite exceptional. I trust the tool quite a lot, but be aware it is software. There can be bugs in there. And so this is why we have configuration turn feature flags on and off as things need a bit of time to mature. So now going back to what I was saying, that not all rules are turned on by default, there is a very simple recipe to do that. So in your root folder, if you create a file called PSScriptAnalyzer settings.psd1, you get implicit settings support, which means if you invoke the commandlet in this location, the tool will pick up the setting file and apply the rules automatically. You don't have to use the -settings parameter for it. It will just pick it up automatically. And what is even nicer is the integration into VS Code. So all I've done is create the file and created an empty hash table in there. So in my settings, I'm just going to say the settings path is going to be this file that I'm pointing to. And by doing that, I now enable all rules by default. Very simple, very easy. And then I can work my way forward and say, oh, this rule I don't like. I can disable the rule and then basically add to a settings file. So recommendation is check in this script analyzer settings file, have the settings path that is a relative path, and then things will work out of the box and you can start customizing them in your settings file. And when we go back here, let's see, it has already applied it, so now we get warnings here. So which means we've turned on all rules. If we were to go back to this menu option here, it tells us, oh no, we can't update it anymore because we're defining the settings in code. So we don't have the GUI anymore. So this is my recommendation, to check it in this way into your repository so you get the out-of-box experience that you can customize that is the same on every PC. So this was the initial demo. Bit talking about Script Analyzer itself. Why was the tool created? What does it do? Just looking at things on a higher level. So initially it was to tell people about best practices. So from the PowerShell team and also from the community. Because some things are kind of in documentation and you find them only over time you find out certain edge cases, like the null operator should be on the left-hand side. And how do you educate people? By having the warnings in the editor, or with the linting tool, you can start educating people about best practices. Some of those include also commandlet design rules. For example, for using supports should process, which basically means if you implement this pattern, you can use a commandlet, have the what if parameter, and it's very nice to use when you're not sure what would happen if I were to execute the script. But you, as a developer, need to be aware that PowerShell offers this. I can write commandlets in this fashion, and the tool can basically help you learn PowerShell a bit. So it's about script function uses, script analysis. I will show an extension of a security module. I've demoed some formatting capabilities. And the next thing that I'm going to demo soon is the compatibility rules. They're quite new. And the basic idea is of when you do a linting is you want to fail fast. So before you run your unit tests or before it goes to production, you can start looking at the problem and fix it very early on, because the cost of making a mistake at a late stage is very high. So you want to find issues in the code that you write early on. So a bit about this new release that I've talked about that we've released last month. There is a blog post out there that you can read. I've done some improvements under the hood that basically make it execute twice as fast on a cold run. So that means for you, when you open the editor, you will see the squigglies faster. And caching was enhanced and really enabled how it should be, which means when you edit your scripts, you get updates much faster now. There will be much more work on this in the future, but I think this release has been really a milestone for improving the responsiveness within VS Code. Some of the formatting rules I've shown: the consistent casing rule, the multi-line pipeline indentation I've shown, and the white spaces around pipes and braces that have been added. It's just small little things that over time make the tool a bit better. The compatibility analysis that I will show soon. We've improved the way we handle parser errors, where we actually return a diagnostic record so that it shows up better as a red squiggly within VS Code. Before, the behavior wasn't quite ideal. When you had more than 10 parsing errors, the tool just gave up. Technically, the way we improved it was a breaking change, as we now return a diagnostic record. But the user experience we find is now much better. But if you disagree, please file an issue and tell us how you find it with the new release. A lot of people use DSC and use some of the DSC rules as well. But in order to analyze DSC scripts, you need to pull down some of the modules in order to parse them, because the script analyzer is relying on the AST, which is a low-level representation of the script that you write. This is how the engine sees the script. And if we can't parse the script, we can't do any analysis. So that's why there is a safe DSC dependency switch on the tool that can download those modules on demand so it can analyze your DSC modules. And another small thing that was added was the ability to suppress custom rules. So I will later show how you can write your custom rules and extend the rule with your custom rules, where maybe you have corporate requirements or you come up with certain standards within your team and you want to extend the tool, but you think this rule is not fit for purpose for everyone, and this is what custom rules are for. So let's go back to the second demo folder. Open VS Code here. So we see the things that we were seeing before. It takes a bit of a while to come up. Sometimes I find myself like just editing makes it trigger the analysis. Now we have the squigglies there. So compatibility analysis. There was already a rule in there about compatibility analysis, which was basically using JSON files that we shipped as part of the installation. They are in the settings folder. It's those files. And that was already present before, but the analysis was a bit limited. So what the analysis could do before is here saying, oh, this is not available on version 4 and OS Windows. You could generate your custom settings and JSON files for that and run it against those. But the data that it collected wasn't very accurate. There were many things that it was missing out. It could only warn you about the commandlets that are available or not on a certain system, or the parameters. There was an analysis about types. And the analysis was always based on a comparison against a default version. So comparing two versions and looking at a diff, and then a tool said, oh, there's a difference, then therefore this commandlet must not exist, which worked for quite a few scenarios. But with the new compatibility rules, we can get much deeper analysis. So before I will show you how to set them up, let's look at how it looks to you as an end user. I'm calling here a constructor using a syntax that wasn't available in PowerShell version 3 and 4. Now it's telling me that directly. So this is one of the new rules in action called PSU's compatible syntax. There's a blog post by Rob Holt who wrote this feature that extensively documents those features. But seeing it live in action is quite nice, and playing with them. For commands, we can be now more granular and say, highlight just this parameter. This is the parameter that broke in a certain version of Windows or PowerShell. We still see that, or here we have it on the new line parameters, so quite sophisticated and a very good effort. For types, so in PowerShell core, there was this semantic versioning type that was added that wasn't present in Windows PowerShell. If you were to use that, it tells you this is not compatible for Windows PowerShell. So there's some limitations with the rules. So when we collect the data for what types are available and not, then we use just a default shell, your default profile. Some types, like for example, Windows Forms, you need to load them from the GAG, and there's a lot of things that you could load from the GAG, and we would end up shipping 100 megabytes of JSON files just to provide that functionality. So there is some gap that it couldn't alert you about WinForms not being supported in PowerShell core version 6. Speaking of that, PowerShell is open source, so I'm running PowerShell version 7. And this is the version that is based on .NET Core 3. So I will show you as well, or let's actually do it. What we will have in PowerShell version 7 is the additional support for WinForms and WPF. It's currently in preview. So at the moment, I'm demoing something that is on the branch, custom build, but it does work. We see some errors, but at the end, a GUI from PowerShell core using .NET Core. And what I'm showing here is I want to transition to custom rules. And when you write custom rules, you have to understand the AST. So what is the AST? Is kind of like, it's a bit like being in the Matrix. So it's kind of like how PowerShell looks at the script. And this tool, show PSS, can basically show you have the script here. This is how it looks like to the engine. And this is how I myself learned writing rules, because you can interactively look at them, understand there is a binary expression asked, you can see the properties available on it. And this is a very good guide for people wanting to start to write custom rules. So speaking of custom rules. Let's maybe pause for a bit, because I think I forget one thing. I was showing the compatibility rules, but I haven't showed you how to configure it. So sorry that I missed this out. Where's my settings JSON file? So I'm pointing to my script analyzer settings file. So let's have a look at this file. We've got much more in there now. I can say, for example, I exclude this rule because I don't like it, and I'm configuring some of the compatibility rules. So this is the old rule, where what I'm specifying here is the file name of those JSON files. When you look at the installation folder, it's matching those files. You can actually drop your own custom files in there, and it will pick it up just based on the file name. Then the next configuration is for the compatible syntax, which is quite straightforward. Just specify your version. For compatible commands and compatible types, it gets a bit more complicated. So let me show you. There is a compatibility profiles folder that has those JSON files in there. And it's not very readable what they are just based on the file name, but we can go to documentation and look it up. So in our GitHub repository, there is a rule documentation folder containing markdown files. You can also browse to them from within the editor. So whenever we have a squiggle, we should be able to, let's see. No. There should be a pop-up that would show you a link to the documentation. Not sure why it's not working at the moment. But anyway, in this folder, you can find a documentation for each rule, which gives you some explanation behind the rule and also how to configure it. So in this case here, it's explaining in detail what those numbers mean. So the OS version, the PowerShell version, and so on. And there's a nice table where you get it in a more readable format, what those names match to. And then those are the things that we ship out of the box with ScriptAnalyzer. There is optional profiles there that we don't ship, but you can pick them up from our source control, which is for Red Hat Enterprise Linux or Debian. Or you can create your own ones. You could, for example, load WinForms from the GAG in your shell and then create a profile there. We have a link here as well of how you could run the tool yourself to generate your custom files. And you can place them in your profiles folder, and it will pick it up based on the file name as well. Okay. Continuing with the presentation now about custom rules. So you want to write your custom rule. That is possible as well. And because of the settings support, we can have the out-of-box experience as well. So what I've written here is a very simple Hello World example that is warning me about something. And there's a bit of logic involved. So the API is the AST that you will receive. You can also receive a token and work based on the token. So the tokens is, loosely speaking, the characters of a script. So that is sometimes not very nice to work on, but there are certain scenarios where you might want to use the token. But in general, I recommend using the AST. And you would usually work your way forward in a script that the AST is quite nested, as you can see here. You would say, show me all binary expression ASTs, and then work your way forward to the branches that you want to look at. You have to basically identify certain patterns, like am I in an if statement, or is there a operator around it? So it gets a bit technical writing those, so it takes a bit of time getting familiar with it. But it is possible to write those rules, and then once you've done your logic, what you need to do is you need to return a diagnostic record which gives the user or the VS Code extension enough information to be able to propagate it to the user. So simple things like the rule name, a message, the extent, which is basically telling it the position of where you want to see the squigglies to appear. Severities, we have info, warning, and error. And also recently added, we propagate the suggested correction property. So if you know what would be the right answer to your violation, you can put the suggested correction string in there. And this simple rule is basically saying, when I have a command name that has invoked something, replace it with something else, which we have in there. And let's use it. So we now see squiggles on invoke something. I can hit control dot. This is the message that I put into my diagnostic record, and it replaces it for me. So you get the same experience. There's no difference. You need to check in then your custom rules or come up with a way of bootstrapping those on demand. There's currently no support, as in like you can publish your custom rules to the gallery, but there's no way similar to DSC that ScriptAnalyzer can pick them up based on like a name that it would download it from the gallery. That is something that we could look into doing in the future, but currently you need to check your custom rules into source control to have them available. So this I find very useful as an example for people that want to get started, where you can copy-paste this as a template and then get a bit more sophisticated. It's always good looking at other people's code to see some examples. So I'm giving some links here. So Injection Hunter is a module published by Lee Holmes from the PowerShell security team, which alerts you about injection vulnerability warnings. He has written a blog post about it. Thomas Reiner has a huge GitHub repository with a selection of custom rules. So have a look at the code, and just reading it is the first step to you learning to write those custom rules, and then take it from there. So let me show you how this would look like in action. So opening VS Code here. Takes a bit to load. So in a similar fashion, I have my settings file that is pointing to the Injection Hunter module. And now it's alerting me about those injection vulnerabilities. Very nice to see a real-life example of it, where you might want to consider taking in other custom rules that other people have made. We were thinking of integrating those into the default set of rules. We haven't done that yet, but this is an easy way of extending ScriptAnalyzer for your usage, because some people might or might not be interested in certain rules. Talking a bit about the release process and the way things are wired up. So the VS Code extension lives in this repository here, which is basically TypeScript and JSON. And the VS Code extension is using a binary.NET module called PowerShell Editor Services. And this module at the end is the one that calls ScriptAnalyzer. So why is that important to know? So when ScriptAnalyzer releases a new version, you can install the new version. And although the extension ships with a version of it, if the extension doesn't get updated, you can just install it locally and it will start using your local installation. So that means you get an early preview experience, you can give us feedback if it works for you or not. We usually have like a week or so until the VS Code extension gets then updated with the newly shipped version. So then during this 1 week window, you can report issues. We can think about adding feature flags to disable certain bugs that we found then in this 1 week window. And the message is just you can use it, but also you can uninstall it if you find if it's not suitable for you. And what we've learned in the past is whenever we add new features, put them behind a feature flag. We've done that. The lesson to be learned is maybe we shouldn't be that enthusiastic and enable them by default. Tell people about them, let them turn it on and give feedback, and then in the second iteration we will turn them on by default. It's very difficult shipping something that is quite generic, is used by a lot of people, whereas different edge cases to be discovered. So this is just a very difficult process, and there's not many resources behind the tool. But that's also where I ask you, the community, please file issues, tell us about things where you think it's not working as expected.
It'd be nice to have a toggle switch if everybody wanted to, turn on everything.
There is an RFC for that. A lot of the stuff is a bit limited in terms of the availability of resources on the Microsoft or community side of things. So I myself have to pick and choose as well. The hours that I put in, will I get the value back, or does it benefit the community a lot? And the same thing applies to Microsoft as well. So we just have to be strong as a community, trying to make the tool a bit better. There's lots of great ideas out there yet, but it's usually the resource constraint. We want to do a lot of things, but we just don't have the time for it. So that's why I'm at least showing things that you can do right now that are not too difficult as a recipe to get you to a state where you want to be. And I think with that I'm getting close till the end. I'm going to very, very briefly talk about things under the hood. So PSScriptAnalyzer is a binary module that is targeting full .NET and .NET Standard. So using .NET Standard means no matter if PowerShell Core uses .NET Core 2 or 3, it will work. We don't need to recompile. That is quite nice. But at the moment, we have conditional compilation for each PowerShell version, which is adding a lot of development overhead, having to maintain builds that work on all those versions. It's just more hours that we need to put into development. And we were thinking of creating a version 2 similar to the VS Code extension, where we drop support for version 3 and 4. Most people are in 5 and 6, and the idea would be people can still use version 1.x. We could still release minor updates to it, but the new development would be in a version 2.0 to speed up the process and make some breaking changes. The tool is quite old, so there's some technical debt involved with it. When it was first written, it was in the early days of PowerShell Core being alpha and .NET Core being alpha. So a lot of the things weren't possible at the time being because of .NET Core not being ready yet. So things like variable analysis was forked from the actual PowerShell source code. And this is something that starts nagging us now a bit. I would like to write a rule to warn people about when you use an array, to warn you about using plus equals on array in terms of performance overhead that many of you are aware of. I've started writing the rule, but I found I can't analyze the script enough to know when I apply the plus equals operator that what I have on the left-hand side is of type array. It could be a variable. And if we could fix that, it would enable more sophisticated scenarios. And so this is where the need for a new major version would come in. Very briefly, to finish it off, there's other integrations of the tools. There is PS Code Help, which is a PowerShell module, but also an Azure DevOps extension that allows you to run the tool in CI. It can produce you a nice HTML report. I'm just going to show that very briefly, that you get a feeling for it. It's quite nice and polished. It actually does way more than just PSScriptAnalyzer. It ships with its own warnings as well, does way more than that. It can analyze PESTA failures. So I recommend you having a look at this great module as well. If you have a CI scenario, you might want to wrap PSScriptAnalyzer as a pester test, as pester returns you an XML file, so you can have your tests in a test tab. I'm just linking to an example of how you could write code to achieve that. And with that, I think I want to wrap up and thank you all for the attention. And if there's any questions, please come up and ask. And yeah, thank you.